this introduction to debate on the thinking production, different international views of protection. It's been a lot of contacts for us this latest year. There's a unique opportunity for student interaction and community debates with guest lecturers or emerging architectural practice with diversified and similar career, like Issa Diabaté from Ivory Coast, Rowan, Rick Joy, Li Xiaodong, alongside with the renowned British architect David Chipperfield. Professors Hey. Psst.
Boa tarde a todos. Nós, antes de começarmos, vamos passar primeiro uns vídeos dos nossos patrocinadores e pedir a vossa atenção, por favor.
Dear colleagues, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to the Faculty of Architecture of the University of Porto to this international lecture series entitled Contexts on Contemporary Architecture, 5 Continents. This international lecture series aims to develop the debate on the contemporary international architectural themes, establishing a close proximity and dialogue between Portuguese architecture, architectural thinking and production, and different international views of architecture, spanning the work of 5 architects spread out over 5 continents. For us, this lecture series provides a unique opportunity for student interaction and community debate with guest lectures of contemporary emerging practices with a diversified and singular career, like Issa Diabaté from Ivory Coast, Africa, Paul Owen from Australia, Oceania, Rick Joy from the United States of America, and Li Xiaodong from China, Asia, alongside with the renowned British architect David Chipperfield from Europe. I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere thanks to the organizers, Professors Neiva and José Cabral Dias, both integrated members of the Research Center and specifically to the research groups Architecture Theory Project History and Housing Project and Ways of Inhabiting from our Research Center of Architectural Studies. And of course, I would like to express my sincere thanks in particular to Mr. Issa Diabaté for having accepted to be part of this event. I would like to end by expressing my deep thanks to our partners, Fundação Luso-Americana and Fundação Oriente, and sponsors for funding this important event, Jofebar plus Panoramaah and Traço de Luz. Last but not least, I would like to thank you all for being here today. A warm welcome for you again. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon to all. In my first words, I have to apologize to Issa, since I'm going to say these first words in Portuguese, because I'll speak about the ideas behind this lecture series, which you already know. And above all, I'm speaking to a Portuguese audience in its majority. Anyway, sorry for that. Desejo começar por agradecer aos nossos patrocinadores. Antes de mais, queria dar-lhes as boas-vindas, naturalmente, e agradecer a presença de todos. E desejo começar por agradecer aos nossos patrocinadores e parceiros institucionais, dizendo que não se trata, naturalmente, de uma figura de estilo, nem de cortesia de circunstância. A dizer que sem o seu apoio este ciclo seria verdadeiramente impossível. É exatamente assim. Este ciclo só se tornou uma realidade graças aos meios que nos foram disponibilizados pelas empresas e instituições que aceitaram associar-se a esta organização desde o primeiro momento e, igualmente, ao empenho das pessoas que a representam. Agradecemos toda a generosidade, a afabilidade com que tivemos o prazer e o privilégio de lidar. Muito obrigado. Queremos, pois, agradecer à administração da Jofebar Panoramaah, em primeiro lugar, como não poderia deixar de ser, ao engenheiro Tavares Nunes e ao arquiteto Pedro Borges de Araújo, mas também à responsável de marketing e comunicação desta empresa, a arquiteta Ana Fernandes. À Traço Luz e ao seu administrador, Dr. João Bencatel, bem como à responsável de comunicação, a arquiteta Joana Canas Marques. À Fundação Luso-Americana para o Desenvolvimento, na pessoa do seu presidente, professor Vasco Rato, e à Fundação do Oriente e à sua direção cultural, na pessoa da doutora Isabel Carvalho. Queremos também agradecer ao diretor do Centro de Estudos de Arquitetura e Urbanismo da Faculdade de Arquitetura da Universidade do Porto, professor do Rui Povas, à professora Marta Peters e ao professor Domingos Tavares por terem acolhido esta iniciativa no CEAU. E desejamos também agradecer à direção da Faculdade de Arquitetura o modo entusiástico como acolheu esta organização. Por fim, queremos agradecer a todos os nossos convidados pela disponibilidade e a simpatia com que aceitaram pronta e generosamente participar neste ciclo de conferências, disponibilizando-se todos eles para vir tão longe sem qualquer contrapartida. Os arquitetos David Schipperfield da Europa, que chegou a ter a sua conferência marcada no dia 9 de fevereiro e foi desmarcada por motivos profissionais, e esperamos que a qualquer momento que o escritório de Londres nos proponha uma data alternativa. Ao arquiteto Paul Lowen da Oceania, que estará no próximo dia 22 de março entre nós, ao arquiteto Rico Joy, que virá no dia 11 de abril à faculdade, Li Xiaodong da Ásia, no dia 18 do mesmo mês de abril. E Issa Diabaté, que, como sabem, está aqui presente hoje, e a quem quero agradecer também, para além das palavras que foram ditas pelo professor João Paredes Xavier. Thank you so much, Issa, for your kindness, for coming from so far and being here today with us. We are very grateful for that. Please make yourself at home. Depois desta parte mais protocolar, queria fazer um pequeno enquadramento do ciclo, dizendo algumas palavras, esperando não os maçarem demasiado. Vou ler para não me perder, porque senão demoraria muito mais tempo. Atenção ao contexto físico e cultural, com simultânea vocação universalista na referência aos temas centrais da própria disciplina da arquitetura, juntamente com a relação com a vida, definem aquelas que provavelmente são as mais relevantes características da arquitetura portuguesa. Esse traço identitário que propomos como uma leitura possível da arquitetura portuguesa serve de ponto de partida para a organização deste ciclo internacional de conferências, que intitulamos Contextos na Arquitetura Contemporânea, 5 continentes. Pretendemos dar um contributo para aprofundar o conhecimento em torno de temas com pertinência contemporânea e internacional, alargando o debate aos 5 continentes, como o próprio título sugere. Quanto mais local, mais universal, diz Eduardo Souto Moura na entrevista conjunta com Álvaro Siza ao Jornal Público, dia 25 deste mês. Identificamos-nos com essa condição e o ponto de partida para este ciclo tem por base uma ideia de arquitetura que mantém a ambição de ser universalista no que respeita aos temas-chave disciplinares, sem que deixe de relacionar-se, de expressar ou de vincular-se ao contexto que lhe dá origem, direta ou subtilmente. Por outro lado, a ideia de arquitetura que se deseja debater atribui um papel central à dimensão sensorial como um dos seus materiais centrais, dimensão essa sempre fundada num local e cultura concretos, ou seja, incontornavelmente centrada no homem e, portanto, uma vez mais, na vida. Considerando essas premissas, trata-se de um debate que, embora tendo Portugal como condição de partida, transcende as fronteiras nacionais e alarga-se a outras geografias. Interessa-nos perceber, ainda que sem generalizações inconsequentes, de que modo é que as questões disciplinares, temas de sempre e de todos os arquitetos, são tratadas e entendidas em diversas latitudes, territorialmente tão dispersas quanto podem ser os 5 continentes. Dispersão essa que implica, necessariamente, especificidades de circunstância e de cultura. Em suma, através dos testemunhos dos 5 oradores, baseados na prática projetual e na exploração das suas ideias, espera-se poder aprofundar o conhecimento em torno de uma ideia de arquitetura culturalmente contextualizada, embora produzida num quadro de um mundo cada vez mais globalizado e dominado pela tecnologia. E como conhecer é aproximar, este ciclo deseja também promover o estreitamento de relações entre países, povos e culturas diversos. Muito obrigado.
Muito boa tarde. Eu vou começar em inglês. So, I'm very pleased and honored for having the opportunity to present Issa Diabaté at FAUP. And I want to start by reaffirming my personal gratitude to the school and to this audience that joined us in this rainy afternoon. I also want to express my deep thanks to André Lepic and Mupo Matipa, main figures in the development of an interesting program called African Mobilities that is spreading the work of African architects worldwide and that helped us to find Kofi and Diabaté Architect. Additionally, I want to mention especially Carolina Medeiros and Nuno Machado, among all the other FAUP members, staff members, for the great commitment in the production of this session. For us, José and me, to be able to open this cycle with your lecture, Issa, is really a special and significant moment. We are extremely happy to hear and learn from you, as well as we are very honored for helping to broadcast your work and beliefs. Therefore, I'll just mention some aspects of your career and work to help contextualizing your talk. I'm sorry, but I better do this in Portuguese. Issa Diabaté nasceu na Costa do Marfim, e é aí, com sede em Abidjan, que desenvolve atividade enquanto arquiteto. Depois do mestrado em arquitetura pela Universidade de Yale, iniciou a sua atividade profissional no início dos anos 90, colaborando com escritórios de arquitetura na Costa do Marfim, Estados Unidos e em França, nomeadamente com Jean Nouvel, onde participou no concurso para a Cité Judiciaire de Nantes. Em 1994, regressado à Costa do Marfim, integrou CEAU Guillaume Coffey, passando a desempenhar funções de coordenação de projeto um ano depois. Em 2001, em parceria com Guillaume Coffey, funda o ateliê Coffey and Diabaté Architect. Issa começou por estudar finanças, por pressão familiar, considerando que desse modo asseguraria um futuro sujeito a menos incertezas. No entanto, influenciado por um enquadramento familiar ligado às artes, fotografia e pintura, desistiu do curso ao fim dos primeiros anos e ingressou em arquitetura. O regresso ao seu país natal representou abdicar de um futuro em Nova Iorque ou Washington, como o próprio refere, acreditando na relevância que o seu trabalho poderia ter em África e particularmente na Costa do Marfim, no qual reconhece uma grande carência e um déficit do papel do Estado na organização das cidades e do território. A relevância do seu trabalho é para nós sublinhada pela sensível qualidade arquitetónica dos projetos, resultado de uma cuidadosa atenção às circunstâncias, às condições climáticas e ao contexto, motivo central que originou o convite para que representasse o continente africano neste ciclo de conferências. Nas suas palavras, e eu vou traduzir, a arquitetura africana tem muito pouco que ver com forma, mas sim com a capacidade de desenvolver soluções locais inovadoras. Embora construa utilizando materiais contemporâneos, a minha arquitetura, diz Issa Diabaté, é africana, por ser guiada por preocupações locais no que toca às dimensões social, tecnológica e climática. Fim de citação. Atuando em diferentes escalas, Issa Diabaté é autor de inúmeras habitações unifamiliares, pequenos pavilhões e pequenos equipamentos, onde é particularmente visível a sua sensibilidade no desenho e na escolha de técnicas e materiais locais, cuidadosamente articulados com novas tecnologias de construção. A construção das expressivas estruturas de sombreamento, que irão ver mais à frente, realizadas com recurso ao betão e estruturas metálicas, são característica comum no desenho dos seus espaços e representam uma resposta cabal às fortes condicionantes de um clima tropical como o da África Ocidental. As suas construções, nomeadamente a igreja e as casas em Assini Mafia, decorrem tanto da preocupação em encontrar soluções construtivas e uma expressão arquitetónica que respondam ao rigor do clima local, tanto quanto espelham um diálogo, nem sempre direto ou óbvio, mas segundo uma interpretação pessoal, com a tradição construtiva local. Issa Diabaté é não só arquiteto, como também promotor. Acompanhando todas as etapas do processo, do desenho à obra construída, procura o desenvolvimento de soluções que encarem o rápido crescimento populacional e urbano das capitais africanas, como Abidjan, assumindo um papel propositivo na sua concretização. Issa acredita que planear a densificação das cidades é uma oportunidade para uma maior e eficaz gestão dos recursos, para a valorização do espaço público e da vida em comunidade. É neste contraste que reside a especificidade e o interesse do trabalho de Issa Diabaté, arquiteto universalista, que opera sobre temas e matérias da arquitetura de âmbito geral, mas que é também um arquiteto enraizado na sua cultura e nos contextos em que intervém. Em suma, Issa Diabaté é um arquiteto que assume as circunstâncias do sítio e da vida das pessoas como um móvel da atividade criativa. Well, after briefly presenting our guest curriculum and explaining why we do consider his work so relevant, I want to finish in English, just to say thank you. Thank you for being here with us, for sharing your ideas, and for letting us learn from your experience. We hope that you feel very, very welcome. We are sure it will be a brilliant conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being here. I'm quite honored to be here this afternoon to share with you what we've been doing in our practice for the past, I would say, 15 years. Although we've been working for, I've been working for 20 years, my partner for about 10 years more, about 35 years. And I would like to share with you what we've been doing in Ivory Coast. First of all, this is myself and my partner, Kofi Diabaté. I'm not sure, as I couldn't understand Portuguese, everything that Anne has been able to tell you about our partnership. But we've been working together since 1995. I started as an intern and then slowly moved into the position of an employee, and then finally we became partners in 2001. And we've been working in a very specific situation. Ivory Coast went through a political crisis from 1999 to about 2010. And this hasn't really prevented us from working through our career. And it actually gave us a lot of strength and resilience with regard to novel and unpredictable situations. And we have now, we moved from an office of 8 people to an office that has about 45 people today, 55, I must correct. And we've been working solely in Côte d'Ivoire. And, well, we started working solely in Côte d'Ivoire, and I think it is important to mention because it is a different thing to work on the continent and have local clients and deal with local technology. This is probably slightly different from other well-known African architects because it situates us within the context. And the context is not only physical, but it's also sociological and it's also technological. You know, what kind of technology do we have at hand to do what we need to do? And this is to tell you a little bit about our context. We live in a country that has been independent for about 50 years, and we've been going through a lot of influences, you know, from the colonial influences to the modern influence to what we live now, which is sort of a mix of contemporary Africa and facing technology from outside. And it is important to really focus on the content because of the sociology of the people, understand what the people need and what do they expect, and how do we make architecture move forward within that context is very important. So I'll tell you a little bit about Abidjan. Abidjan is a city of 6 million people today. It was pretty much planned as a city of about 1 million people. But we're facing very specific situation today, which is the growth of the urban population, which is exponential, and also a lack of vision in the governance of that growth with regards to urban issues. And this is sort of understandable because it is sort of unprecedented and quite recent, you know, from maybe late 20th century, where we see cities with such an afflux of people coming to one spot, you know, from the country, which makes Abidjan sort of spread and spread and spread. And you can probably see in the back, although this was the initial center, you can see that the city has been spreading and spreading and spreading and is still spreading to the point that, as you can see here, you can see that although city planning is trying to regulate things, it is having a hard time catching up with whatever is happening here. So most of the time people tend to build, and then the urbanism will try to catch up. And this is sort of transformed into a very organic situation. And you can see here, you know, to make a comparison, this is Abidjan during the 1960s, and this is Abidjan in 2016. And you can see how what has become the vision that was the vision of most of our leaders after independence was to use urbanism to sort of build up society and create a social model, and how this has become sort of more organic, and how the city is sort of caught up onto this model. And although this is from 50 years ago, it is a lot better organized than what we see now, which is quite organic. And this is mainly due to the fact that the population has grown, and a lot of people have moved from outside the city to the city. So this has sort of led us to think a lot about what to do in our country as architects. We started by maybe sharing our vision with city officials, and we sort of got really frustrated because when you talk to a city official, minister, or what have you, they always think your idea is nice, and then as soon as you leave them, they just move on to something else. That's because we realized that the time of the architects is very different from the time of politics and politicians, and when they're focusing on their 5-year terms, we are actually planning for life. So after a certain point, and after being frustrated for quite a long time, we sort of felt we had to take things into our hands and not necessarily have to collaborate with government. And this is how we decided to become developers. Why developers? Because this is the only thing that allows us to be the owner of the idea all the way to the finished product. So it has allowed us to design whatever we wanted to design, having the issues that we thought were important in mind. And you see here what is the traditional vision of development in Ivory Coast. And of course, this is not sustainable. You look at those neighborhoods, and when you come back a few years later, they've turned into 3-4-story buildings just because the city is moving with its own logic. You know, when the developer has this in mind, he has this because he wants to sell plots of land and houses. And when some people move into those houses, what they have in mind is to maximize profit. So they will build on a plot that was initially designed for one house. They will put a 2-, 3-, 4-story building because the city is spreading. because if you want land, you have to go far, and because the furthest you go, the more problems you have with utilities, with transportation, with traffic, with water supply, with electricity. So this is a logic that is actually happening within the city that a lot of government officials don't really have a hand on. So as architects, we already do a certain number of things, you know, from big boss to landscapers to you know, family counselor to documentalist to sociologist, engineer, I mean, public speaker, seller. I mean, we do a lot of things. And we sort of thought that it was time that we could apply this sort of way of thinking to the ecosystem of housing and urbanism in Côte d'Ivoire. So being a developer was definitely a way to tackle issues that we thought were important. So we started with a very small project in the mid-2000s where you see in this neighborhood, they usually have big plots of land, about 2,000 square meters, on which they built only one house. And of course, this was associated with space and luxury, and we thought it was time maybe to show a different vision of comfort and luxury. So as you see here, this was initially one plot, and we decided to divide it by 6 and have 6 plots and still be able to sell the same kind of houses for the same kind of people. And actually, we were pleasantly surprised to see that it worked quite well on what was considered then to be a tiny plot, that people would actually buy those houses because they felt that a lot of their needs were covered, and also this sort of limited maintenance. So we played a little more and applied the same logic to this building, which we call Immeuble Carbone, which is a building that we built next to our office in 2009. As we were moving to a new office, we decided that it might be a good solution to at least build a building to sort of compensate for the low times in architecture. As we know, architecture is never totally stable. So we built this thing that on a very tiny plot of land. As you can see here, this is our office, and the building is right here. And for us, it was an opportunity to connect the building to the main road and create somewhat of an address on the street. So once we were done with that, we ended up selling the building because we wanted to tackle bigger projects and actually be more professional with regards to development. This is how we went to our next project, which is called Les Résidences Chocolat. And this project was really designed to incorporate all of what we thought were important in architecture, issues such as density, issues such as living together, issues such as putting together resources to sort of save on the final bill in the end, putting a lot of green, saving a lot of space for greenery. And it just so happened that in this compound, we were able to create common space for, on a plot of land that is about 1 hectare. We were able to fit 32 luxury units. For us, it was important to start with high-end because if you set a trend with high-end, you're more likely to develop it for other types of projects. So here we have 14 houses and 18 apartments. Most of the houses were sold as the other types of houses we find in the neighborhood, which likely would sit on the 1,000 square foot piece of land. And we were also able to bring the people in this compound together by sharing this one space. And how did we do that? We created an underground parking space to save the space and avoid cars going around in the neighborhood. So we put all the cars downstairs, and we have a connection to each house, you know, from below. And this really allowed us to save a space that is about 17 meters wide by 120 something in the center that is used as common space. And it's quite pleasant to see that the owners have now taken ownership of this space, and sometime, at least once a month, you see them having drinks there, and it has sort of fostered a sense of community. So what we based our process on were some of those points that you see here. We think it's important to live together because we can live together and also at the same time preserve our private space, as you can see here. This is a common area, but in the back of each house and each building, you have a private garden. We think it's important to live together also to avoid the waste of space. We think it's important to live contemporary and in harmony with our times, although we live in Africa. And we have to deal with very specific issues with regards to our climate and our social environment. This doesn't go against necessarily incorporated contemporary architecture. We think, and that is very important, to live together, to live collectively. And we figured out with this project that when you live collectively, you're able to save more. You're able to save space, you're able to save energy, you're able to save, for instance, we have one gardener taking care of the entire compound. There is only one generator for everybody. And there is a sense a sense of ownership with the entire compound as opposed to a sense of ownership of one house. So this has been quite successful. And of course, with densification, we're able to at least put 32 units on a plot that would usually take maybe 6 houses. So also, that allowed us to save a lot of green space, and we have a ratio of about 60% green space on the compound in total. We can see here how dense this is. This is during construction, center space, back space, which is private. And to make a quick comparison with the other plots in the neighborhood, you can see how dense this is. And it's funny because since we finished the project, you can see that a lot of the lands around the neighborhood have densified. And we think it's very important to have an action like this so that we can contaminate other architects and other people in town to go in a similar direction. We think that this is probably more effective than government policy or maybe governmental vision right now. And we think it's quite important for the architect to take ownership of the vision and to implement it without having to wait for the context to be ready for it. So after we design, how do we finance such a program? This was a big challenge when we wanted to be independent from the beginning to the end, and we think that is what has been able to preserve our vision. And being independent meant that we would have to, instead of having partners, financial partners who could impose on us their vision, we decided to go to a bank, to a local bank, and all of that to reinforce the idea that a project like this can be totally local in its governance, in the actors, and in the people who can build it. And the first reaction of the bank was, we know you as architects, but we don't know you as developers. So how do you sort of alleviate the risk for us? And we were like, okay, what we can do two things. The first thing is that we bought this land in 2006. It was about 1/10 of its worth at the time we were building, because, of course, 2006, we're in the middle of a political crisis. And then we started building around 2012. We were over the crisis, and the country started attracting people again. So the land value went up. So we were able to leverage on the land value to sort of comfort the bank. And the second thing we did was we're only going to take half the financing because we truly believe in this project, and we will start selling before the project is completed. All you need to do is give us half the money and we start building, and we will sell as we build. And this has been quite successful. So we were able to actually sell all the units before the construction was done. And once you have the financing, how do you sell it? How do you build it first? Building for us was also part of the vision. So we were like, okay, what we can do is try to federate a number of small companies that are local, that actually need jobs like these to sort of get a little bit of notoriety, but also people that are flexible enough for us to work with and sort of shape the way they would work on this project. So we were able to do things like, maybe you cannot see it very well here, I mean, sort of resuscitate certain older practices with regards to building that had disappeared because they were maybe labor heavy or just too complicated to do. So working with small companies that allowed us to sort of go back to previous ways of doing buildings. And of course, once you, I mean, we were able to build the entire project like that. Of course, you learn a lot in the process. And we wanted to do this because it also allows us to decide whatever goes into the building and whatever goes into our margin. As architects, of course, we will take a lot of gratification in the quality of our product, which is not necessarily the case for a developer. A developer would look at its margin before they look necessarily at the architecture. And that has allowed us to maybe give a little more to the architecture to express our vision. But after building, how do you sell? To just go back a little bit, I was telling you that these are houses that are sitting on 400 square meters, and that we're selling at the same price of a house that is sitting on 1,000 square meters. So how do you convince a client to make the move? For us, it was very important to sort of set a trend and maybe educate the client in the fact that a house is not necessarily a quantity of space, but quality of space, and what it does for you, not necessarily as an object, but as a lifestyle. When you live in a compound with 32 other families, it makes a lot of difference, a big difference, than if you're living alone in your house with your big walls around. So that has really sort of created a new clientele. People who already owned houses have sold their houses to come and move here because they felt that they were taken care of, that they didn't have to get a generator, that security was already taken care of. We also organized a condominium fee so that every 2 or 5 years the building gets repainted and maintained. So our action as developer really went way beyond building to the point that now we're still having a hard time to get detached from this, after 2 years. And also the quality of space, as opposed to the quantity of space, has been very instrumental. The fact that the volumes have a lot of light, and that we've used a lot of greenery and vegetation makes a big difference. Here are a few images of the finished product. This is the inside of an apartment. And this is one of the terraces. And we felt it was very important to also give a good chunk of space to the outdoor spaces, because that's where we mostly spend our time in a tropical climate. We like to take advantage of natural ventilation and temperature. So this has been quite a success, and of course, in a place where you have the need for about 50,000 units a year, what is 32 units of high-end residential is going to do to the total print? just to remind you that actually this whole developer thing started because we wanted at least to have a different way of developing the city and showing people how to maybe develop it differently. So being confident after this one, we are now moving to another project, which is 226 units, which is called Abata Village. It's sort of in the same principle. We're now on 3.5 hectares, but developing 226 units. In keeping in mind the fact that we need to have a lot of green space, so we have a lot of courtyards. We are on the lagoon side, so we sort of privileging the sort of a promenade for everybody, and we are also trying to make all the cars disappears, by sitting every buildings and every house unit on a plinth with parking space underneath. So we're hoping that a project like this will also contaminate the area and sort of become the norm for other people who want to build. So just to give you an idea of where the project is with regards to the city, downtown is here, so this is a little bit far. But what we thought was interesting is that today Abidjan has a lot of traffic congestion, and we think that the lagoon, because we have a magnificent lagoon that sort of goes all the way around, is completely underused, and we don't have much transportation by lagoon. So we thought it was very important for us to sort of be on the lagoon. Of course, this is a little far from the center, but what we think is interesting is that we're in Abata. Abata is a village. It's a village that is very close to the city, and that is getting developed by the city. People are buying land there because it's cheaper. And we thought that before the city would get to the village, it was important for us to put a big equipment that would sort of structure the rest of the village with time. So by putting this there, of course, during construction time, a lot of people in the village will benefit from proximity of this, and hopefully maybe within the next 5 to 6 years we will be able to develop other plots of land and probably invite other architects to do the same. So the way the complex is structured is we have 4 entities. 4 building entities, 1, 2, 3. So the first 3 are sort of row houses and small apartment buildings sitting on a plinth, while the fourth one is, which we call a W, is a series of buildings that are linked together with 2 apartments for each stair, and below here is the sports complex. It was dear to us to keep the natural ventilation, so all of the apartments are cross-ventilated, just to avoid the extensive use of air conditioning. We're also planning on solar for all the common equipments, and are still exploring the possibilities of collecting gray water as we did in the previous one, but it's getting a bit more complicated with the bigger we grow. So here you can see how the apartments are cross-ventilated, which is relatively easy to do. You just need to put an opening on each side, and then you get a flow of air. Here you can see how we can, how the front is going to be used. And what was really dear to us with this project was to introduce a little bit more mixity than we did the first time. So now we're starting at much lower prices and are spanning to what we call maybe luxury penthouse, from maybe a studio to luxury penthouse. So this allows us to have different type of population living on the same in the same area. We are also fostering the sharing of the space, of the compound, as something that everybody owns. So it's not about the size of your unit or where it's positioned. What we try to foster is a sense of community and a sense of ownership for the entire compound. We also are relying a lot on natural ventilation and light for all the spaces, including parking spaces, which are, halfway garden with vegetation going all the way down. And we've been able to also avoid roads in certain parts. I mean, of course, we have to keep this for regulation so that the firefighter can go around, but we didn't want to have it completely paved. And so most of the time, cars are not allowed to drive there, and it still sort of keeps its garden quality. Of course, we rely a lot on planting also to shade a lot of the face of the building. And as you can see, all of the glass is sort of recessed so that we barely get any solar exposure. We've also been able to include some retail, at least for the community, including pharmacy, convenience store, things of that nature, and are really hoping that people who live there don't necessarily have to go far out in order to find those type of stores. We also included an office building on the same plot so that we can have office, living, and leisure with the sports utility, all of that on the same plots and same compound, and with a swimming pool that will allow people to just enjoy the neighborhood. So this is scheduled to start within the next 2 months, construction, and we've started selling the units, and it's I mean, people are quite excited about this because it sort of again fits some of their needs with regards to the way the city is going. And now I'm going to move to another area of what we do, which I think is also very particular to the way we do architecture, and the fact that we think it's very important to take ownership in the projects and not necessarily rely on governance or city governance to tell us what to do. This is Issa Diabaté. Issa Diabaté is a little village which is about an hour away from Abidjan, which is very well known for its beaches right here. And the particularity of this space is that you have the ocean in the back, a strip of land, and then the lagoon before you get land again. And the configuration is quite pleasant, and a lot of people like to go there on weekends. And that place has been an opportunity for us to do some building on this area. It started with building for client, then building for ourselves, and as we started being sort of frequent to the area, we sort of created close ties with the community. So we do a lot of actions with the community, including urbanism and building. So if Abidjan is here and Issa Diabaté is here, it's close to the border of Ghana. This is maybe a better picture where you can see the ocean in the back, strip of land, which is mainly used for beach, and some of the houses that were built over the past 10, 15 years. Some of them we've done, and some of them have just been done by other people. And the way people usually build in Assini is this way. And if you look at this house, you see that it's made out of little strips of wood that are nailed next to each other. And this is very particular to this area because what people are looking for when they do this is they're looking for cross ventilation, because the wood is never totally sealed, so you get a breeze through the houses. And this is very different than the typologies that you would see when you go up north in Côte d'Ivoire, where you'll start to see buildings made out of earth because earth allows to insulate the inside. So here we're looking for airflow. And this has informed our practice in this area quite a bit, and we will see it later. And I will start by showing you projects that we did with the community. This is an area that was, before we started doing things there, this was a dirt road. And there was pretty much nothing around. And what's interesting is, as we started being sort of frequent in the area, we thought it was important to also give a sense of urbanism and a sense of community to the place. It started by trying to make the fences uniform using little earth blocks. The first thing you encounter when you try to do this is you go to the neighbors and tell them, well, what do you think about making the fences uniform, creating a sidewalk, planting grass on the side, creating a trench here, and aligning the trees. And the first thing they tell you is, who do you think you are to come and tell me what to do with the front of my house? So when you encounter reactions like this, you first do it for yourself. And once you do it for yourself, then the neighbors come and say, oh, this is kind of cute. I didn't really understand what you're talking about when you mentioned this, but I could go with this. So one after the other, and after about 10, 15 years now, we've achieved about 700 to 800 meters. So it's a slow process, but it's certainly a gratifying one. After we convinced all of them to build sidewalks, we also tried to convince them to buy the plots of land across from their house and sort of donate half of this land to public space. Of course, same thing. You go to people, you tell them that, and like, well, why do you want me to buy space and not use it? And so what we did is we bought a plot of land and only used half that we gave to the public and started planting trees and a garden. And all of a sudden, the neighbors realized that this is actually improving the urbanism of the area they live in. So they start to see the benefit. And also with the garden, we've been able to convince most of the neighbors to donate half of it. So now we have a huge garden with lots of trees, and this space is used by the villagers not only to hang out and rest, but also, when they're doing weddings, they come there to take their pictures. And of course, beyond those projects that deal with private spaces and luxury homes in sort of beach area, it is important to be connected to the community and to be connected to the villagers, so you can understand what is their expectation, and you can also assist them when they want to do certain projects, such as the church. So the church is really an interesting project because it started for an NGO that is running certain things in the village, because this is not yet, this village doesn't have a mayor yet. So it's an NGO that is running some of the trash and some of the urban issues in the village. And the villagers wanted to build a church. So the NGO decided that since the villagers don't have much money, it would be interesting to tap on the resources of the people who come to the beach and also collect whatever they could collect from them. So we were able to collect wood from a big industrial guy who does wood. We're able to collect the metal sheeting for the roof, able to collect some cement. We as an office donated the architecture. And this is pretty much how we achieved this building here, which is the Church of Assini Mafia. The principle of this church is based on very simple principle of ventilation, you know, where you have those ears on the side that just, you know, capture the air beneath it, and it comes out on the top. So inside you always have a very good temperature even when it's very, very hot outside. The plan is very simple. It's just a rectangle, you know, with you know, the hostel at the back. And this is a picture of the church on Sunday, you know, with people worshiping. And what I would like to say about Tassigny is that it's been very helpful to us in dealing with issues that are very specific to our physical environment, with the climate, with the ventilation. And this house here is a wooden house that we designed for a fair. It was a fair that lasted about a week. And we designed this house and had it made in about 5 weeks. It's all made out of local wood, plywood, and local materials. So after the fair was done, we dismantled the house and rebuilt it on one of those plots I was telling you about, you know, where we kept half of it for public space, and the other half we sort of reconstructed the house there. And of course, what we're trying to do with the houses we build in Tassigny is retain this sort of space in between the roof and the ceiling, so we can get an airflow. When you get an airflow in between, you avoid the heat, you know, that radiates from the top to enter the spaces below. So you always have a very comfortable temperature inside. Also, to reinforce that, we use a lot of cross ventilation. So you see all those louvers here are on both sides. So when you open them on one side, you get the airflow that comes out on the other side. So these are pictures from the house. And this is the plan. As you can see here, in all of these are louvers, so you get airflow. And also in the room, you have an opening here and an opening in the hallway, so you can also get an airflow and here as well. So it's quite comfortable as a house, you know, for tropical climate. Some pictures inside the house. And now I will show you some other work that we've done also in Tassigny. This house, Camellia Pavilion, is our first experience using rammed earth. So always the same principle of the ventilated roof of the wooden structure, which is local wood. We try to keep those structures quite simple so that they're easy to maintain even in the village, that we don't have to take somebody from the city to go to the village to have them maintained. And as you can see here, this is what I was telling you about. So you get the airflow in between the ceiling and the roof so that you protect the inside from the heat. This house is actually has a very interesting plot of land because all of this here is mangrove. I mean, you don't see it on the drawing, but it's sort of hidden in the mangrove, and it gives it a very, very specific character. This picture is from the entry with the rammed earth wall. Some more pictures of the house. You probably see here that we put a lot of effort into keeping the connection of the inside to the outside, not only visually but physically. Here, for instance, you have to get out of the living room, and if you go into the bedroom, you actually have to literally walk outside of the living room to go inside. And it actually makes a lot of sense because, as you can see here, this is the bedroom, this is the terrace. Because when you go to such places, most of the time you want to be outside, and you don't necessarily want to feel behind walls. So even if you're sitting in your living room, you open the bay windows, you're totally outside in the garden. More pictures. You can see a little bit of the mangrove I was telling you about, and you have a little opening, and the same here. So the detail of some of the windows, the louvers, and the rammed earth. And now I'm going to move to another house, which is the Bamboo Pavilion. This is actually the house I use on the weekend. This is my weekend house. And this was, as every project designed by an architect for himself, a very painful and questioning process. in this house, what I was trying to do with the bamboo is give privacy, give privacy, but not cut the house from the airflow. So when you walk to the house, you barely see what's behind the bamboo, but you definitely get the airflow when you're inside. This is an image of the house now. So on top of the dead bamboo, I've added a layer of living bamboo, which also reinforces the intimacy before you get to the house. This is the house and how it sits with regards to the lagoon. So this is the way you walk to the house. This is where the bamboo screen is, and in the back you have the pool and the connection to the lagoon. What was really important for me in this house was to focus on the panorama, focus on the view rather than focus on the house. The house is just a tool to house maybe bedrooms, living space. And actually, the space that is mostly used in this house is the terrace. This is where we spend most of our time. It's in connection with the pool, and it's also in connection with the nature and the coconut trees. So behind the bamboo, I have sort of a walkway that links all the rooms together. And as you can see here, you have bay windows that are behind the bamboo screen, but the bamboo doesn't prevent you from getting a nice airflow when you open the bays. And actually, the bays have been a good tool to monitoring the airflow. Most of the time, especially if you live in a city like Abidjan, you would tend to want to benefit from the airflow. But when you're next to the ocean, at times the air can be a little tough. So you can close the bays in the back and still keep the connection to the outside, but not get the ventilation go through. And this is actually a view from the house to the lagoon. This is a picture of my son playing on the terrace, main space. And this is a picture of the house. Picture that shows you the airflow and the ventilation within the house. And lastly but not least, I will talk to you about this project in relation to the house. So a few years ago, after I moved here, I realized that this land, which is mainly undeveloped now, was facing pressure from people to buy because it's empty, it's quite cheap, and everybody can pretty much lay their hands on land there, which may result in things like this. And this is probably not the worst, but we can see worse building happening on this strip of land. So it was important that maybe I start worrying about what will happen across from the house. And it just so happened that from going there all the time, you get to know the people, you get to know the villagers, you get to know the families. And this land here belongs to a family I know. So when I talked to them, they were already in the process of dividing the land and selling it, into little plots like this. And which, of course, is scary to me because you never know. I mean, when you see previous example of what has happened, when things develop that way, it's quite scary. So I approached the family and told them, well, we can do the following thing. Let me sell the plots for you, and I will guarantee that at least we get some proper sidewalks, proper fence, proper lighting, trees, etc. How do we do it? We do it by actually doubling the price of the land. Half of it will go to the owner, and the other half will go to all the equipment that we're going to put on site. You can. This is pretty much how we try to seduce the potential buyers by showing them what will happen. If you have your building here, of course, the building will take care of. You don't have to pay extra fee for that. We can certainly manage to build a prototype that we can adapt to each client. We would like to make the fences uniform. Like to at least have a green sidewalk, keep public lighting, have an alleyway, use a gutter. The gutter is really interesting because we're going to use the water from the gutter. We're going to sort of channel it into little ponds that we can use later on for watering the gardens. I have a project of putting a vegetable garden there, so the water pond can serve for that as well. And also give an identity to the general space with the bamboo fence. So this is a little bit of an example of how this neighborhood could evolve. We redrew the plan of the neighborhood to sort of keep this as a green space. So it's a big park, you know, where we have one pond here, another one here. Planted extensively to create somewhat of a microclimate. As you saw earlier on the picture, it's quite empty of trees right now. And also sort of convince all the owners to not have a fence on the garden, so that there is a direct link between the different owners. So this is going on right now, and this is an image of what we would like to see when it's finished. And all of that really to tell you that being an architect in African countries, and specifically in countries like Côte d'Ivoire, it is very important that we think about the context and think outside the box. We should think in terms of designing ecosystems, designing sort of putting all the ingredients together for our projects to be able to come true. Otherwise, we tend to sit in a situation where we're always focusing on what we don't have, also focusing on the social aspects of architecture, which is only one very tiny part of what is going on in terms of architecture on the continent. In terms of, especially in cities where we need to establish new models for cities to develop. We can no longer rely on government vision, we can no longer rely on funding of a very orthodox administrative process. And we have to pretty much try things and contaminate other architects so that in the end we can see things change. And for me that is really important to the practice of an architect in Africa, and quite exciting, because finally we have somewhat of power in our hand to design our work and actually create our own work. And I think that the architects and the African architects has to become an agent of change. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Just asking if someone wants to.
Okay.
Muito obrigada. Eu gostaria de perguntar à audiência se tem alguma questão a colocar. Temos aqui o microfone, podemos passar à vontade. O Issa está plenamente disponível. Como habitual, ninguém pergunta nada, não é? Não modo, podem perguntar.
I do have a question for you. Actually, most of the people in Africa are under poverty line, and I guess that most of the inhabitants of Abidjan don't have the money to contract an architect. And you say that most of your work is based on like contaminating other architects to do the same of you, such as increasing density of the city. But how can you actually change the ways of inhabitation, dwelling of the most of the people, since they don't have money to contract an architect and all these kind of things? I don't know if I made it clear.
No, this is actually a very good question. I think that what we have to do in our work is try to be inventive. Of course, what we'd love to do is be able to design for 20, 50,000 people right away. But there are two hurdles to that. The first one is the money. As private people, how do we get the money? It's always easier to start with high-end. And the second thing is, how do we build up our practice? It's always better to start with, I showed you a picture with where we started with 6 units. We moved to 32. Now we do in 226. Every time we move from one project to the next, we sort of lower in price and bigger in plots, or at least in units. All of that to say that before we can reach and be really effective in providing architecture for 20,000, 50,000, we have to go incrementally. And learn every time we move from one project to the next, we do learn a bunch of things in the process. And it's always actually surprising. When we moved from 32 units to 226, we thought that the banks would follow us because the first project worked well. But no, they were like, well, you're asking for a lot more money now, so you're taking a lot more risk. And maybe we have to find a different way to do this. So it is a very slow process. And I think, why do I think that contamination is good? Because you're contaminating people with a vision, not necessarily with a kind of project. So people who see that you're building 32 units that are high-end on very small plots, will then maybe try to develop, while densifying, on smaller plots of land, or densifying differently, maybe going higher up. So when you do it yourself, it's a very slow process. We're hoping that not only do we contaminate architects, but also in the process contaminate governmental vision. But for us, it was important to start doing something. Thank you very much.